So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brendon McAtee. I am one of the node research managers at Natural Hazards Research Australia. I'm happy to be part of this online briefing for the Disaster Challenge 2024 this afternoon. And thank you all for making the time to attend. I'll talk a little bit more about the Disaster Challenge in a moment. The things we'll work through today, what it is, how to get involved, why you should get involved, and what you'll need to do to be involved. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present from around the country. I'm coming to you today from Noongar country over in Perth in Western Australia. And I think we should acknowledge that the things that we're thinking about here today complement Indigenous knowledge that have been in this space for a long time. And I look forward to working with both sets of knowledges in the future to continue our work in disaster risk reduction, hazard management, and those kind of things. So I mentioned myself, Node Research Manager with Natural Hazards Research Australia. I'll be accompanied a little later in the session by Dr. Margaret Morton from the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience. First, I'll talk a little bit about Natural Hazards Research Australia for those who haven't come across the kind of work that we do before. So Natural Hazards Research Australia is a not-for-profit research organisation which is set up within the emergency management sector that complements other agencies like National Emergency Management Agency, the Australian Institute of Disaster Resilience that we're talking about a little later, and those kind of things really with a research focus. So we work with participants in the emergency management sector who might be agencies in different states. For example, in where I am in Western Australia, it is really about, well, one of the agencies we work with is Department of Fire and Emergency Services. So you can imagine equivalent agencies around the country that we work with as participants in our centre. Our role is to work with those agencies to understand those challenges, articulate those knowledge gaps and those kind of things that will help management of natural hazards going into the future, and then join that up with the research capability that can help to solve those problems. So we work a lot with agencies, we work within the sector, and importantly, we work with the research sector as well. And one of those channels that we work with the research sector in and really engage that new thinking, engage the new skills that are being developed through the next generation of researchers is through the Disaster Challenge. So the idea of the Disaster Challenge is to work with undergraduates, graduates, and early career researchers to really help their thinking and solve some of the big problems that we see in the emergency management sector. So the Disaster Challenge is really about working with researchers to solve these big problems, and we'll talk about those a little bit more through this session. That's a little bit about the role of the Disaster Challenge. What is the Disaster Challenge? Well, you can see some of the description there on the screen, which I'll let you read for yourselves. But really, this is a national challenge that seeks to bring that new knowledge, skills, and expertise into the emergency management sector from researchers all across different disciplines. With a national steering group, we've been working to define a challenge question for this year that can really engage different thinking from throughout the sector and through different researchers, with the idea of bringing that research capability and knowledge into the sector and helping NHRA to really bring that research into the sector and start to solve some big problems. So the Disaster Challenge is around a wicked problem. We'll talk a little bit more about the challenge itself and wicked problems in a moment, but that idea of a wicked problem, as you can see there. So these are big, complex problems and have many moving parts, many different facets, and not just a single solution. And so the idea of the challenge is to bring knowledge into to meet these kind of challenges. And as we'll talk about in a moment, first, we really need to understand what problems might be part of this larger challenge, articulate those, and then once we talk about the problems, we can start to talk about the solutions. And that's where we can really bring our knowledge and expertise to bear. And so the Disaster Challenge facilitates thinking about a wicked challenge, which is fundamental and really important to the emergency management sector. A little bit, let's think about why might you want to do this. So I'm glad to see a number of people in here this afternoon. So apart from using your skills and expertise and meeting people within the industry, we want to incentivize that by putting there's a a $5,000 prize to a winning team or the winning entry. But working in this space allows you to make a difference. And I think, I know for myself and my colleagues involved in NHRA, that's a big part of what we do as well. We like to do this, and it's a fulfilling place to work. We use our skills and our expertise for something which is really important. From the research perspective, you can start to build your credentials through this program. This is one of NHRA's program, but we have quite a big national reach. So to work through this challenge, part of the benefits from that is showing your work to others and demonstrating what you know and your capability. Making networks is an important part of this as well. The emergency management sector is very diverse, and to build your profile, start to show how what you know and what you can do can be applied in the sector. That's really part of what this challenge allows as well. That can be tied to career advancement, showing these are the things that I can do. These are the kind of problems I can solve, and working with people in the industry so they can see what you can do and where that fits with the problems that they need to solve. And as we unlock future opportunities in emergency management research, that's really the space of NHRA, and start to work from build your capability and research expertise into the problems that we work to solve with our industry participants. Mention the prizes again. So $5,000 prize for the winning entry, promotion of the winning concept across our networks, the opportunity to work with Natural Resources Research Australia, but also with our partners in the sector, and showcasing your ideas at forums that we're involved with that are upcoming as well. From the entries that we receive, we'll be choosing up to 3 finalists, and the 2 runners-up will each receive $2,000 for their efforts. And as you say, there's other challenge about how you take your knowledge and your ideas and your thinking experience and really make a difference within emergency management. So this is the challenge that we have working with the National Steering Group have set for this year. And you'll see as you read through that, it is really about trust. Trust is a really important element, not just everywhere, but within the emergency management sector. Building, sustaining that trust is a really important piece. And you can think about it from a number of different facets, and that's what makes building and sustaining trust something which is really a wicked problem within the sector. You can think about a lot of things to go towards building trust, and we need to build trust between people and organisations, or when we make decisions. So there might be those communications elements to this kind of challenge. There might be those community-based elements, or there might be data-based elements as well. Think about how accurate are the data that we make decisions from. So there are a number of ways you can start to approach this kind of challenge, and that's what we encourage through this challenge. And what it tells us is that this is a wide and quite broad challenge, because the emergency management sector is wide and quite broad as well. So we need all the skills and knowledge from our research to bring those together to manage natural hazards as well as we can going into the future. So the challenge this year, as you can see there, is around building, sustaining trust. I think that's a really interesting challenge, and we're going to talk a little bit more about, unpack what that might mean and ways to think about that challenge a little later on. So talking about the Disaster Challenge 2024, this is how it's running at the moment, and a couple of phases that we'll go through. So we're in the phase at the moment where the challenge is open and accepting entries. That will be until the 7th of July, and we'll talk about in a moment a bit more what those entries might look like. Following the closure for entries, 7th of July, we'll be evaluating, a board of judges will be looking and assessing all the entries that we receive, with the idea of choosing up to 3 finalists out of the entries that we receive, and notifying those successful entrants who will go into the finalist round. So there'll be 3 entries there that will commence, that will be notified in the week of 29th of July. Then one of the interesting parts of this challenge, which starts to meet those goals that we were talking about of building research across the emergency management sector, entrants can start to build their profiles, show what they can do. Those 3 finalists will be part of a mentoring program. We'll talk a little bit more about it a little bit later as well, but really help to build that pitch, help to articulate that idea, get it validated by people within the sector, and really build up that idea and the pitch around it to be able to describe to people, culminating in a disaster challenge final, which will be in Perth on the 4th of October. And that'll be the opportunity to pitch that for the 3 finalists to pitch their idea to some judges at that event, and they will determine the winning entries. So they're the 3 phases of the event. So now we'll talk a little bit about how can you approach a wicked problem. So I want to just talk about a couple pieces of that. One of the notes that I'll make as well is a little later on, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you've got any questions about what I'm talking about here or any of the other pieces, please post that into the chat, and we'll get to those in a little while as well. So how can you approach a wicked problem? So the real challenge here is that these problems are sprawling, they're complex, and there's no real one solution to fix the problem. So the first part of approaching a wicked problem is what's the actual challenge or the problem that I'm going to solve? There are lots of ways you could address the challenge that we're talking about, and that can be based on your own set of skills and expertise, knowledge, and experience. So our first step in these spaces, which are complex, often quite ambiguous, is to really say, what is the problem that we're trying to address? To really articulate that problem. So why is it a problem? Why is addressing it requires new and innovative solutions? So that idea of why hasn't it been solved before? So that's the first part of really approaching these kind of things. And we'll see how this flows into the entry forms for the disaster challenge just in a moment. So once we've really articulated the problem that we're solving, then we can bring our skills and expertise together to really define the solution. So then we can describe our approach to addressing the problem based on what we know, bringing our skills and expertise together. We've got to talk about what we want to do, improve our approach to disasters and build and sustain trust in this case. Being trust is at the center of what we're trying to work with. And how do we know this proposed approach is going to work? What evidence do we have to support that this is a good solution? How is our approach different to what's already been tried? And we know before that there's a reason that it's still a problem. And so what we're doing, why is it new? Why is it innovative? And why will it work? And then after those initial ideas or those initial facets of our problem, if we want to not just solve one small problem, but can we expand that? Is it affordable, adaptable, and scalable? And importantly, achievable for other parts of the system or the sector where we might find these problems. And so this is part of the online entry form. So entries to the disaster challenge are online. And then you can see there, we've talked about articulating that problem statement first. So what is that problem that you're going to solve? So that thinking around what is that problem can flow straight into an entry form in the disaster challenge. And that entry can be either written, like we see here, or you can answer these questions in video format as well. But importantly, that thinking around what is the problem I'm going to solve, articulating that and thinking about those different facts of the problem can flow straight into the entry to the disaster challenge. As we just talked about, once we think we've defined the problem, we can start to talk about our solution. How are we going to solve that problem? What's important to solving that problem? Why will this approach work? And those elements that we just talked about can flow straight into the entry form of the disaster challenge. So the thinking exercise can flow straight into the entry form and entry into the challenge, which makes it very simple. And as I said, you can write about it in the online form, or you can create a video if you feel that's a better way to express your ideas. So as we mentioned, how do you enter? Well, you'll find that if you go to the Disaster Challenge website, you'll find that Enter Now button there, and that'll take you straight to the form. And you can start to articulate your idea within there. So all you need to get started is just your ideas. Go to the website. If you need more information, have a look at the guide for entrance, the terms and conditions, so you know this is what you want to do, but they're pretty straightforward. And so this is a challenge. I guess I would say here, one of the important things about working in the emergency management sector with different people, different sets of skills, and different ideas, that idea of collaboration is really important. So that collaboration is something we really like to promote between this challenge as well. So if you can work in a team, bring those team members together who might have a set of different skills to really solve a problem, we really encourage that. Spend some time to understand the wicked problem and why it's difficult to solve. So those things that we just talked about, that idea of identifying the problem, thinking about through the bits of the problem, then developing your solution and why that'll be the right solution. And those are the elements that you really need to go through, put that into the online form, and then you're entered into the competition. So that's a bit about this year's challenge, a bit about how the challenge event is working. And what we wanted to do as well is, I've talked a bit about it. You might have some ideas about it, but what we really wanted to put out through this challenge as well is perspectives on this challenge from people who work in the emergency management sector. And Dr. Margaret Morton, as I mentioned, from the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience, has been involved in the steering group and have spent some time thinking about the formulation of this challenge as well. So I'm going to pass over to Margaret now, and she can talk a little bit more through what AIDA might be, and how she sees this challenge in the emergency sector space from her perspective. And I'll pass over to you, Margaret, to tell us a bit about the challenge from your perspective and those things which you bring your skills and experiments into the space.
Yeah. Thank you, Brendon. And I'm really tempted to answer some of the questions, but I'll actually leave it to you to answer the questions in the chat. And I'm happy to give a perspective if that's useful. So, hello, everyone. My name is Margaret, as Brendon said, and it's my absolute pleasure to work with the team in AIDA. And I've thrown into the chat up at the top for anyone who thinks, who is AIDA? I'm just checking. It may not be there again. So let me do two things at once, which is always risky. And I will throw back into the chat the AIDA website address for anyone who's never heard of us, which is fine. And if you have a look at that, you'll get a sense of where I'm coming from and what we do here at the Institute. So yes, I've been involved in the steering committee, and yes, last year and this coming year, I'll also be involved in the judging. And the first thing I wanted to say about the challenge is that it's really hard. So this is an answer. This is a question or a problem that many of us have been thinking about and doing our best to make a difference to for quite some time. And I am excited and cannot wait to see the sorts of ideas that come forward through this channel, through this challenge, because we haven't solved this problem. So the first thing you need to know is that this is a difficult, wicked problem, and there isn't really an expected answer. I personally am hoping for some unusual and innovative thinking, and I would encourage everybody to really have a think about what this problem is all about. It sounds sort of straightforward. A little bit about my background that might just help you understand where I'm coming from. And I can talk under wet cement, I believe is the phrase. So I'll try not to talk for too long. And slightly unusual beginning, perhaps. I grew up in the country on a farm. And one of the things you'll learn when you grow up in the country on a farm is, at the risk of sounding insane, is that you learn how the circle of life works. And you learn that what happens in one time of the year or at one part of the process has a direct and either highly beneficial or highly catastrophic effect on what happens next. So if the planting season doesn't work, then you're not going to have a good harvest. And so I grew up understanding long-term thinking and systemic thinking. And one of the things that we in AIDA are spending a fair bit of time thinking about at the moment, which we're going to explore further at our conference later in the year, and all of this is on the website if you want to play and have a look around, is how the system works. Now, you might say, how does this relate to a challenge about trust? Well, the first thing I would say is that there are a great many organisations and motivations that are involved in emergency management. So the phases, which I'm actually of the view that we don't have phases anymore. But traditionally, we've talked about phases in any emergency experience throughout planning, preparation, mitigation kind of phase into an emergency is imminent, and then an emergency response phase, and then an early relief and recovery, and then a very long tail, which people used to think was a short tail, but now we know is a long tail of many years of recovery. And what we know now is that these extreme weather and other events are all happening on top of one another. So really, it's not a process of going through phases and getting to a new normal. I think a lot of the language we've used for the last decade or so is becoming increasingly irrelevant. So not only are you looking at a wicked problem about trust, you're looking at a really wicked and complex context for this challenge. There's nothing simple about it. I like something that Andrew Gissing, for anyone who isn't aware of Andrew runs the NHRA. I like something he says, and so I'm starting to steal it, adopt it, and use it myself. He wants his research and the research of the NHRA, and including this challenge, to be useful, usable, and used. And ADA's part in that system is that we're all about making sure research is used. So what we do is we produce knowledge. We build on evidence and lived experience. We build on a whole range of people with specialist knowledge of particular topics. We collaborate with them, and we create knowledge and opportunity to use that as practitioners in the field. So a lot of our stakeholders are in local government, state and federal government, non-government organisations, community groups, a whole range of different sectors of the society we live in. And we're trying to make sure that knowledge about risk reduction and the building of resilience is used to create a safer environment and to reduce the harm that occurs when these events happen. We're in no way assuming that we will slow down emergency or extreme weather or other disastrous events in life. They are going to continue to come thick and fast. In fact, there's a whole lot of evidence that many of you would know that they are coming thicker and faster. I don't think anyone uses that language. Compounding, cascading, increasingly intense and frequent events. So the context for this question of trust is really challenging. Now, I have a view which I think is right. I think one of the things we all have to do is challenge and be prepared to be curious enough to think, what if we're all wrong? So if anyone out there is thinking, I reckon I've got a completely different way of viewing this, go for it, because you need to challenge all of us. You need to challenge our thinking as part of your proposal here. But I have a view that collaborative approaches are the ones that work. I was talking with an organisation the other day, and they're trying to work out how to have an interdisciplinary approach to a research challenge. And I think that's on the money. So for any of you who are trying to work out who to collaborate with, I think we need really different types of thinking and different types of research working together to solve the problem. That's the only way we solve wicked problems, by getting different perspectives. The challenge for that approach is that you'll find that people you're working with might not make sense to you. And I encourage you to think that that's a good thing. If we don't immediately make sense to one another, it means that we think differently. And if we think differently, the chances are better that we're going to solve a problem. The question of trust, I've been thinking about, what is trust built on? I'm a human social scientist. So depending on which kinds of research you're all into, I can't help but think there's got to be a relational element of building trust, and there's got to be a lived experience element of building trust, because trust can be enduring, and I run the risk of sounding philosophical at this point. Trust can be enduring, and it also can be broken really easily and really fast, potentially in a moment. And a question that occurs to me is trust between whom? So a lot of my work before I joined ADA was around the building of a bridge between community leadership and government organisations around emergency planning and emergency response and recovery. And when you get two completely different lived experiences, the experience of people living in community and the experience of people working in government, then you get different languages. They literally speak different languages. And you get different expectations, and all of that makes it a little bit tricky to build trust. It takes time. Add into that emergency services organisations, support organisations that come to town or to the region in a recovery or relief context. And we're talking about a lot of different ways of thinking and living. And yet we're asking you to come up with an idea that builds trust. So I could talk about this forever. I'll be very interested in what comes forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions or have any kind of discussion in this session. Probably the only other remark I would make at the early stage of this is we live in a world where AI is emerging and people are starting to use it often. In terms of language and in terms of images. So some of the deep fake information, some of the fake news information looks real. It looks incredibly real. It looks like a reality, and yet we now know that it isn't. So building trust in a world that's technologically advanced and filled with fake information is even harder. I only hope we get some submissions here, Brendon, because I actually don't know what I would do or what I would propose. I only hope we've got brains out there that are really thinking about how to accept the challenge and step up to it, because it's a real challenge. It'll have enormous consequences for practitioners and for communities. And it's tricky. It's very tricky. So that's my opening set of remarks. I'm wide open to questions or conversation. Brendon, back to you.
Great, thanks, Margaret. I think that's a fantastic introduction to the complexity of what we're talking about. I was going to ask you one question before we move to Q&A. I know there's a few questions in the chat. You've got a lot of experience, like you mentioned, from a long time thinking about systems, working in systems, developing those innovative ways of thinking to solve problems within systems. What's your kind of advice for that first step of finding that right problem to solve out of all those connected problems that you've articulated within this kind of system?
I think take or leave my advice. That's the first thing I would say to anyone listening. But I think what I would do goes back to the question of diverse perspectives. So, in a way, I think when I came to ADA, which I'm just starting to look around the corner at 2 years of being here, which is amazing. When I first came here, I thought, right, really ADA's role is similar to this. How do we build trust and connect across a whole lot of different organisations and sectors in society so that we collectively can create a safer environment in which to live and work and grow? And how do we do that? And which voices are at the table and which voices are missing? So I think the first thing I would suggest is that researchers interested in this challenge have a similar conversation. Which perspectives are necessary in order to work out how to tackle the question of trust? And, in the work that we do and in the work that emergency management practitioners do on the ground, often, I don't mean to offend anybody, I'll do it this way. Often the people in a community or the people in a region that come forward to look at these issues look a bit like me. they've got grey hair, they're over 50, they're semi-retired or completely retired, and there are very few people with young kids because they're too busy raising their young kids. There are very few young people. There are very few people with disability. In lots of places, very few First Nations people step forward. There are lots of reasons for that, but I think the first thing I would do is try and think about how to get an interdisciplinary, multi-perspective group of people to sit around the table and say, how are we going to tackle this issue? That's the first thing I would do.
Great, thanks, Margaret. And again, I think you've highlighted how complex the sector is, and how many people need to be able to work together with their different backgrounds, skills, and experience in order to really solve these challenges, or at least make headway in these kind of challenges. I think that's part of my experience in this sector as well, is that, you referred to the collaboration there. I think that's really important. And I think that, being able to work through people speaking different language, and not necessarily, different language from different parts of the world, but, different sectors that we work in, or different technical backgrounds that we come from. Yeah. And I think they're certainly both part of those kind of challenges. And I'd echo your thoughts in that's where we get those creative, innovative solutions out, is working with those people that we don't usually work with, part one, and part two, that sometimes we don't even understand. And I think that's, they're really interesting barriers to cross, and give us some really interesting thought out of there.
The other thing I would think of, because just listening to you feed that back, Brendon, has me thinking, I think the winning solution to this challenge is also going to have different aspects, I would expect. So how does technology help us? We've made such progress technologically. There are so many creative things emerging now. How does technology help us? How does humanity help us? What does evidence say? What's creative thinking? Because if we always look to the past as to what's always worked, then we'll always be solving a problem that's already over. What are the new, fresh ideas for how we might work together? The insurance sector's coming in on this whole area fairly heavily now. Large businesses, philanthropy, there's all sorts of sectors of society moving into this sphere that make it pretty complicated. And they all have different, as I say, different languages and different ways of looking at things. So I don't think a solution is going to be a single sector solution. It's going to have different aspects to its application.
Yeah, great. Thank you again for those thoughts, and sharing your expertise and thoughts and experience from the sector as well. I think, I'd encourage people that are joining us today for this briefing to kind of think about the things that Margaret's talking about there, because I think, they're really exploring different dimensions of this idea of trust, and how you can create your best solution to put in, what you're going to solve, and how you're going to create your solution to it. We might just address a couple of questions that I see in the chat. So thank you very much, Margaret, for your kind of thoughts. There might be more questions for you to come. We'll see if anyone puts anything else would like to ask any questions. First question from the chat about the scope of the challenge, I guess, and who can enter. So should it be a specific problem to Australia, or can we consider a burning problem outside Australia? For example, problem in an Asian country. I don't think that there's a boundary on where the problem exists. What we want to make sure is, as Margaret was talking about, that we really bring a solution to a problem about trust within the emergency management sector. So that could be a location, or it could be, it could be a technology, or it could be ways of working. So I don't think there's a geographic boundary to the solutions or the problems that we're trying to address, but they need certainly to work in that space around how are we building and sustaining trust within the sector. That would be my first comment. Another comment there, so ECR student or early career research is eligible to apply through a team. I think for the purposes of this challenge, that we're looking for all the people to be involved, to be in that research part of the research community. So that could be undergraduate, postgraduate, or early career researchers. We should also acknowledge that teaching through TAFE and registered training organisations can also be eligible. Depends on that background and where that level of study is, and perhaps involvement within the sector. I'd encourage you, if you'd like to know more, to email that out to the research team or at NHRA, and you'll find those details on the website, or myself, and we can talk about that idea of eligibility and formation of teams and who can be in them. But we certainly do want to encourage that collaboration. So diversity within teams and coming from different knowledge bases is very much encouraged, and we'd like to enable that however we can. I see a note in there. Thanks for the wise words, Margaret. I'd echo that. They're all the questions in the chat. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to pose, either on about the challenge or about kind of the ideas that Margaret might have been talking about?
Can I just add to it what Margaret said? So it's Deb Sparkes from AFAC here. I'm part of the steering committee as well. So
just before you go on, Deb, do you want to just explain AFAC? Not everybody might know who AFAC is.
So we're the National Council for Foreign Emergency Service Authorities in Australia. So all our members are the Rural Fire Service, Land Management, SES, Surf Life Saving, and we also collaborate with ADA as well. So a strong connection there. Is that when you're thinking innovation, I think the first thing everyone thinks about is technology, and it doesn't have to necessarily be technology that we're looking for in this challenge. So I just wanted to sort of emphasize that as well. It can be completely analog.
No, thanks, Deb. And I'd echo that as well. Not every solution is an app. So that kind of thinking, and as we're talking about, to build up that idea of working together in the space, it doesn't necessarily have to be a technology solution. There are ways, we can be talking about ways that people can work together better, for example, between communities and within communities and those kind of things. Just noticed there, so from Thomas Munn, I represent a company from the tech industry, and we're keen for researchers to reach out. What's the process for that? I would suggest, Thomas, that one thing is to put your details into the chat now, and people can read with a bit of what your interests might be, and we can encourage people to contact you in that. The other way that we are just forming up the panel of mentors as well. So if you drop me your details, I'll get in touch with you. That might be another way to contribute to this challenge and enable those connections with researchers to be made. So happy to enable that, and thank you very much for providing that avenue for researchers to reach out. Part of this forum as well is about trying to connect people who might want to think about a common challenge together. So I'd encourage anybody who would like to do that to put their name and perhaps a contact email into the chat. We'll distribute that to other people who've been involved in this briefing. We won't go any wider than that, but people who are involved in the briefing and perhaps in the briefing number 1 as well, so that we can put together names. And if your name, a contact detail, and your interest, we might try and, what we want to do is try and facilitate people joining up if they'd like to do so in order to put together a challenge or an entry to this challenge. So thanks for those thoughts, Wade. What I'm going to do now is just go back to the last bit of the disaster challenge slides, just to reiterate a couple of things as we go through, just around what we're looking for in terms of entries and what happens from here on in. Let's go to that. So we've gone through a little bit of Q&A, and thank you for everybody who asked those questions. And as I mentioned, feel free, if you'd like to, if you've got any further questions, if you go to the Disaster Challenge website, you'll see a couple of emails. I'll put my email in the chat in a moment as well. So this is a little bit about now, what are we looking for in the judging? And we touched on this a little bit. And so that idea, we're talking about first, we really want to understand the problem. Okay, so that's the first part of it, of addressing the wicked challenges, to pull that piece together that we think we can solve and bring our skills, expertise, technology together. So the first part is really how well have we articulated and understood the problem that we're solving. And once we've got that articulation of the problem, then we can move on to the must-haves, or we want to think about the solution to that. And what are the things that we're looking for from a judging perspective in terms of the entries that come in? So we think about the first parts around the problem. So it's a focused problem. We understand it. It's well articulated. It's informed. So we know that it is a problem that needs solving, and why it needs new and innovative solutions. What we want to see in the solutions to those problems is then, these solutions have impact. They'll work. They're new thinking and innovative. They're the important parts of that solution and that idea to really solve the problem. And then if we talk about the idea of nice to haves, what are the things, if we're going to build that idea into something that scales and has a lot of impact, there are things to think about. So it needs to be affordable so that agencies or people can get it and use it. It may need to be adaptable. Can it work in different scenarios? Can it be scalable? So it might work in one community. Can we scale it up to a region, for example, or across the country? And importantly as well, is it achievable as well? So I think that's an important one, that balance between something being the best idea ever and innovative, but can we actually do it? Something to think about in there as well. So these are the kind of criteria that the judges will be looking through for the entries that come in. I mentioned the mentoring role. So pitch development for finalists from the 29th of July. So the entries for the Disaster Challenge close on the 7th of July. A panel of judges will be assessing those over the course of July, with the outcomes to be let people know by the 29th, the week of the 29th of July. And then we'll commence the mentoring phase. So a bit like we've noted already, and thanks again to Thomas for putting those ideas in the chat. Who can, with the ideas that are the finalists, we will put together a mentoring program which will have pitch development, so developing that idea, developing the way in which you present ideas to judges. We'll be working with people from the sector who will be able to provide that validation of your ideas and help to build those kind of things up. And so it's really about developing that idea. It's about validating it, making sure that it's the kind of thing that is going to work. And then how do we pitch that? How do we communicate that to other people? So we'll be working on, those will be 3 key elements of the mentoring program, which will go on for the finalists in August and September, leading up to the challenge final event in October. So I just wanted to revisit those couple of things just to reinforce this is the really important part of entry. So really describing that problem statement. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Articulating that really well. And then, why is it a problem? Why addressing it? Why it hasn't been solved so far? Why does it need a new and innovative solution? So understanding that problem, then proposing the solution. So as we talked about before, how we solutions solve the problem. How will it improve disaster response and build and sustain trust? And we should include in there not just disaster response, but whole approach to emergency management. How do we know the approach will work? What evidence do we have to support it? How is an approach different to what's already been tried, and why is it more likely to work? And then explain how the proposed approach, is affordable, adaptable, scalable, and achievable. So these are the important parts of thinking about the problem and thinking about the solution. So that's the thinking part. And we have the entry forms there, which are set up to really easily dovetail into that thinking. So that same things we've just been articulating there is what needs to go into the description of the problem statement, your articulation of your solution. And again, they can be, when you go to the entry form, you'll see they can either be in written form like we've got here, or you can make a video which addresses each of these points. So in terms of tips to get going, they are sprawling. The challenge is sprawling. It's complex. It has many facets, as Margaret articulated. So in order to start that thinking, perhaps focus on a small piece and then expand. So is it a particular type of disaster or natural hazard that's important? a particular event that has occurred, a place, a need that you might have already identified that would help in the sector. Resources, does it help particular responders or particular actors, if you like, within the emergency management sector? Or do you want to achieve a particular outcome or benefit? So perhaps in such a sprawling scenario, starting small, then expanding. So form your own understanding of the wicked problem in its context. So what we've tried to achieve through today's briefing is really give you some thought about what does trust mean in the sector? What might it mean? What are different ways to look at the problem, and how are people experiencing it differently? So that kind of reflection, asking questions within people in the sector, or consulting literature to really understand the context, and then using that, leveraging off that to inform a solution using the skills and expertise. There's more information in the guide for entrants, which you can find through the Disaster Challenge website. And of course, talking with people. So, we talked about the importance of collaboration. We talked about the importance of working and talking to people in different languages, and not necessarily different dialects of language, but from different parts of the emergency management sector and different disciplines within your research sector. So as I mentioned, there's more information at the guide for entrants, the terms and conditions, and you can also see previous year's finalist pictures if you go to the Disaster Challenge website. And then getting help, as I mentioned, research@naturalhazards.com.au. You can email there, and that will come through to the team there. If you're in your research environments, you can talk to your lecturers and supervisors, other students as well. I will just pop my email in the chat so that you'll have that. And so there's not much more to it really than to develop your problem statement, create the solution, and enter the challenge, so that we get to see all these good and thoughtful and entries from our talented research community. And if you'd like us to connect you with other people that might have been at these briefings and thinking about the challenge, you put your name, interest, and contact emails in the chat, and we'll share around a list of that to people who've been involved in these briefing sessions that might let you collaborate with people who are also thinking about this challenge at the same time.
Brendon, just one other point that you may not even be aware of, but last year's Disaster Challenge winner was invited to speak in our innovation stream at the Research and Innovation Day at the AFAC conference. So there is a possibility that that might occur next year as well. Excellent.
Thanks, Deb. And so those, summarise that, those kind of opportunities through the Emergency Management Network. So Natural Hazards Research Australia works alongside AFAC that Deb was talking about, ADA that Margaret was talking about. So working in this space helps to promote those kind of ideas and the things that you do throughout that sector. And I would say thank you to everybody for coming along this afternoon, for being involved in this challenge briefing session. Thank you to Dr. Margaret Morton from Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience for her excellent discussion of the challenge, what it can mean, and the ways to start to think about it. Thank you to everybody who posted some things in the chat of their ideas and questions, and Deb Sparkes from AFAC for your inputs as well. That brings us to a close this challenge. I'm just putting my email in the chat right now, and so you can find more details at the Disaster Challenge website. You'll find my details there, as well as Natural Hazards Research Australia and our research office. Thank you very much for being involved, and I look forward to seeing your entries come into the challenge. Thank you very much.